Chapter 7, Part 2. The Systemic Fix. Suppression, Subversion, and Secrecy. If the immediate aftermath in Dallas was the necessary physical violence of the Iron Grip's operational success, the subsequent decades represented the systemic violence of the cover-up, a prolonged campaign of legal subversion, evidence destruction, and institutional secrecy that secured the ultimate triumph of the lone gunman lie. The systematic destruction of evidence. The cover-up required the systematic elimination of physical evidence and the suppression of witness testimony, a powerful display of the Iron Grip's ability to compromise the state's legal framework. Autopsy and brain photos. Grave claims have persisted regarding substituted photographs of the president's head wounds, and most notoriously, the substitution or corruption of his brain photos, allegedly to obscure the direction of the fatal shot. The official storage of the president's brain in the National Archives and the subsequent heist of a piece of it only fueled suspicions of compromised evidence. The Zapruder Film. The home movie captured by Abraham Zapruder was the most important piece of visual evidence, but the government's handling of it was deeply corrupting. It remains one of the most studied and contentious sequences in American history. The film was immediately confiscated, and questions have always persisted about the missing frames that could have clarified the timing and source of the shots. The timing of the shots, specifically relative to when the presidential limousine passes the Stevens Freeway road sign, created a significant challenge for investigators attempting to prove the lone gunman theory. Crucially, the Zapruder film was not the only film confiscated. Several other films and photographic records from witnesses were seized and never officially released or adequately investigated. Conflicting commission findings. While Hoover and the Warren Commission insisted on 3 shots from the rear, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, convened later in the 1970s, found evidence of 4 or 5 shots and determined that a conspiracy was highly likely, directly contradicting the initial FBI Warren findings. Sam Giancana, a crucial figure in the investigation, was murdered days before he could testify to the extent of his knowledge before the Church Committee in 1975. The lone legal challenge, the Garrison Trial Oddities. The only legal attempt to prosecute the assassination was conducted by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. The circumstances surrounding the trial of New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw are replete with the same systemic oddities that characterize the federal cover-up, serving to highlight the deep infiltration of intelligence and law enforcement into the alleged conspiracy. Suspects eliminated. Garrison suspected 4 individuals were involved in the plot. By the time the trial of Clay Shaw commenced, 3 of those 4 key suspects were already dead, echoing the mob's eliminate and silence playbook. Compromised witnesses. The key state witness, Perry Russo, testified that he overheard a discussion of an assassination plot at a party. Garrison was later shown to have administered sodium pentothal, a so-called truth serum, to Russo, and to have used hypnosis to refresh his memory. This compromised the witness's testimony and fatally damaged the state's case. Intelligence infiltration. The trial exposed deep connections between the alleged conspirators and U.S. intelligence agencies. It would later be revealed by a former director of the CIA that defendant Clay Shaw was in fact an asset of the CIA. Furthermore, one of the original suspected co-conspirators, Guy Banister, who ran a private detective agency in New Orleans that employed Oswald, was a former FBI agent with extensive ties to anti-Castro groups. The New Orleans trial ultimately failed to secure a conviction, but it was the first and only public courtroom airing of a conspiracy theory, simultaneously confirming the existence of a deep intelligence crime network in the assassination's orbit and demonstrating the ease with which its legal case could be systematically dismantled. The Hijacked investigation. The federal response to the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas was not merely a faulty investigation. It was an act of deliberate usurpation of legal authority that successfully enforced the lone gunman conclusion. The violation of jurisdiction. The law was clear. The assassination was a state crime that occurred in Dallas County, Texas. Therefore, the Dallas County authorities and the Dallas Police Department held primary jurisdiction over the crime scene, the evidence, and the deceased president's body. Any official investigation, including the mandated autopsy, should have been conducted under the authority of the Dallas County Medical Examiner. However, the federal government, driven by the need to control the narrative and enforce J. Edgar Hoover's deniability doctrine, compromised this legal framework from the start. The FBI assumed control. Hoover's announcement of the lone gunman conclusion immediately rendered any independent local investigation obsolete. The formidable resources and authority of the FBI swept aside local law enforcement and intelligence gathering, directing all efforts towards proving a predetermined outcome. The seizure of the body. The most egregious breach of law occurred at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. Texas law dictated that the body of a victim of a suspicious or violent death could not be moved until a legally mandated autopsy was performed by the local medical examiner. A conflict, often described as a near battle, erupted inside the hospital between the Secret Service and the Dallas County officials, including the local Justice of the Peace. The Secret Service, citing national security, hijacked the president's body from the hospital, overruling the direct legal demands of the local authorities. The body was flown immediately back to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, a federal facility where a closed, compromised autopsy was performed under the complete control of military and federal personnel. This action ensured two critical outcomes for the iron grip. Number one, it prevented the legally mandated, independent Texas autopsy that would have been conducted by local civilian doctors and forensic specialists. Number two, it allowed federal authorities to control and limit the forensic evidence, setting the stage for the manipulation of photographs and reports that would later confuse and obstruct the public understanding of the crime for decades. This immediate, illegal compromise of state authority by the highest levels of the federal government confirmed the success of the iron grip. The ultimate fix was not just achieved through violence and silencing in the streets of Dallas, but through a seamless, top-down enforcement of obfuscate and obstruct within the highest chambers of American power. The Dallas Playbook. The ultimate motivation for this act, and the power of the cover-up, was rooted in the mob's strategic victory over the Kennedy assassination, a response to the Great Betrayal. Ruby's own operation cemented the link. His nightclub was only a few blocks away from the assassination site, and he claimed that he was close by at the morning news office at the time of the shooting. The entire operation demonstrated logistical foresight and ruthless efficiency. Furthermore, an independent observation of the Dealey Plaza crime scene suggests that if Oswald, as a lone gunman, intended to take those shots from that window, the most sensible time to do it would have been when the president's limousine was coming toward the depository building, slowing to make the turn onto Elm Street. The shots fired after the turn, as the car was moving away and accelerating, suggest a minimum of either extreme hesitancy on Oswald's part, or, far more likely, additional shooters positioned elsewhere to ensure the hit was successful. The combination of the mob's operational control, Hoover's immediate shield of denial, and the corruption of the subsequent federal investigation stands as the most devastating expression of the iron grip, the systemic destruction of the truth to protect the architects of a national crime. The 50-year lockbox of secrecy. The immediate actions in Dallas, the seizure of the body, and the declaration of the lone gunman were followed by the federal government's final act of obfuscate and obstruct, the systematic locking away of all sensitive evidence and intelligence related to the assassination. While the main Warren Commission report was released to the public in late 1964, the volumes of supporting evidence, witness testimonies, FBI and CIA investigative files, and key intelligence records were declared top secret and sealed away in the National Archives. This classification ensured that the fundamental components of the investigation, the raw data, photographs, and internal memoranda that could contradict the official conclusion, were placed entirely beyond public and journalistic scrutiny. This enforced period of secrecy was a crucial component of the Iron Grip's success. It allowed the official narrative to solidify in the public consciousness, while denying critics and historians the necessary tools to expose the systemic failures and possible conspiracy. The files remained sealed until public pressure, fueled by continuous skepticism and political unrest, forced Congress to intervene. The President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, the JFK Act, was passed with the explicit intent of reversing this secrecy. It mandated that all assassination-related records be fully disclosed by October 26, 2017, unless a presidential certification deemed continuing withholding necessary for national security. This action confirms that for over 50 years, the U.S. government maintained an invisible shield around the evidence. Even after the 2017 deadline, subsequent presidential administrations continued to certify that portions of the files must remain sealed, often citing national security concerns. The fact that the release of the final, unredacted documents is still an ongoing political archival process, even 6 decades after the event, is the most profound evidence that the systemic compromise of 1963 was intended to be permanent.